Chapter 7. The Smell of Leather and Fear. I started calling that place the Leather Box. It was a small, windowless store near Aksaray, with racks of pricey jackets and an even pricier hidden catalog of human desperation. Everything smelled of leather, polished, dyed, sometimes spiked with the faint aroma of chemicals. Over time, I noticed another layer beneath it, something rank and stale, like old cigarettes and fear that had soaked into the walls. I had gotten used to the stench of fur coats and lalelli, but leather was different. It reminded me of restraints, of harnesses, of surfaces that trapped sweat and heat. More than once, I found myself gagging at the pungent odor in the store's back room, where men lounged, barking commands for me to bring them drinks. Every time I walked past those racks, I would catch a whiff of something synthetic, a pungent bite that made my stomach coil. Fear was not just an emotion now, it was a physical presence in my body. When my shifts started, my palms would turn clammy, my chest would tighten, and my eyes would dart to every corner, searching for potential predators. Because that is what most of them were. Predators. They wandered in under the guise of buying a sleek leather coat, but their real interest was the girl behind the counter. Mustafa, the overseer of this windowless store, seemed to feed off the tension. He would lean in whenever I spoke to a customer, gauging my willingness to serve them beyond the transaction. Sometimes he would roll his eyes if I refused a man's proposition. Other times he'd just sigh, glancing at the ceiling like I was a disappointment. My fear, my reluctance, none of it mattered to him. I found myself living on constant high alert. A slamming door made me jump. The ring of the store's old telephone sent my heart racing. Even the quieter moments felt fraught with menace, because that was when the particularly brazen men would sneak in, expecting something behind the locked door that led to the back room. More unsettling was the realization that no one heard you in this city, even if you did scream. I had learned that bitter lesson in the alley, and it only grew clearer. Istanbul was loud, chaotic, teeming with life at every corner, but people kept their heads down. Pedestrians in the street never intervened. If a fight or assault flared up, neighbors turned up their televisions if they heard screams through the walls. The police rarely poked around these districts of trade and subtle trafficking. Zara and I had joked, in a dark way, that we could vanish for days and the city wouldn't blink. It was not really a joke, though. It was the truth. If you disappeared here, especially as a foreign girl with shaky legal status, you became just another statistic lost in the labyrinth of side streets and locked doors. This knowledge fueled my nightmares. I'd jolt awake at dawn, certain I'd heard footsteps behind my bedroom door. Some nights, the man who claimed to be my mother's husband tried to barge into my room, half drunk, demanding an update on whether I was making real money. My mother always intercepted him, but her interference cost her more bruises. Each time I wanted to scream for help, but I knew no one would come. At some point, I realized that my silence was its own currency. Silence kept my mother and me from being thrown onto the streets. Silence allowed Bekir and Mustafa to keep pushing me toward prostitution without a big scene. If I spoke out, if I screamed, if I called attention to what they were doing, they would retaliate, and the city would not stop them. So I stayed quiet. Even when a man cornered me near the back room, pressing me against a rack of belts with his stale breath washing over my face, I bit down on my panic. I evaded him with forced politeness, stepping away with a trembling laugh. Mustafa watched from behind the counter, not lifting a finger. Later, he scolded me for not playing along enough to secure a sale. I began to understand how the price of silence was measured in bruises, in hidden tears, in the slow erosion of my identity. Each time I kept my mouth shut, I paid a little more of my spirit. But speaking up risked everything. My mother's safety, my own life. In that twisted equation, silence became survival. When men came specifically looking for extra services, Mustafa guided them through a locked door at the back, which led to a small dingy lounge with a fraying sofa and a flickering overhead bulb. At first, I only had to bring them drinks or entertain them with conversation in Russian, but it was obvious that some girls were brought there to do more. Girls who would show up looking drained, eyes dull. I recognized one of them from the days I worked in the fur shop. She used to be timid but hopeful, telling me she needed fast cash. Now she was gaunt, her lips chapped. She glanced at me once, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. then looked away as though ashamed. My heart twisted because I knew I might become her soon, once Mustafa or my mother's husband decided enough was enough and forced me into that back room with a paying client. One night, it almost happened. A wealthy Arab man arrived, wearing a tailored suit, accompanied by 2 other men who spoke minimal English. Mustafa ushered them in, showing off the best jackets, but their leader's eyes landed on me. He nodded in my direction, murmuring in Arabic. Mustafa shot me an expectant look. "He wants to talk to you privately," Mustafa said, forcing a smile. My heart pounded. My cheeks go cold. "Talk about what?" I whispered. Mustafa shrugged. "Just do what he wants. He is ready to spend thousands." The man crooked a finger at me, stepping into the lounge. I trailed behind, legs wobbling. Before the door shut, I saw one of his companions slip Mustafa a wad of bills. Inside, he patted the sofa, indicating I should sit. I perched on the edge, skin prickling. He spoke in halting English. "You, come hotel with me, good time, I pay." I forced a shaky breath. "I am sorry, I cannot. My boss, my mother, they are waiting." He grinned, leaning closer. "No problem. We handle, boss." He reached out, his hand sliding across my thigh. I flinched, heart hammering. I cannot fully explain what happened next. Some survival instinct took over. I jumped up, stumbling back, knocking over a small table. The crash startled him. He cursed, grabbing for my wrist, but I twisted free, my adrenaline spiking. Mustafa must have heard the commotion because he barged in, face dark with anger. The man raged at him in Arabic, pointing at me. Mustafa tried to smooth it over, but the man stormed out, followed by his companions. When we were alone, Mustafa's fury boiled over. "I told you to cooperate," he snarled, spittle flying from his mouth. He was offering top dollar. I trembled, tears burning my eyes. He was too rough. He slammed his fist on the table. "You are going to get us both killed if you insult men like that. They have connections." Then he pressed closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Do not think your father figure will be happy. You know what he will do to your mother." That ended my protest. I stood there shaking, until Mustafa shoved past me and kicked the door. The rest of the night, I sat behind the counter, too frightened to speak. My thigh stung where the man had grabbed me, as though his fingerprints were scorched into my skin. The store never smelled so strongly of leather and fear as it did that night. I realized the 2 scents had merged in my mind, the pungent odor of hides mixing with the sour reek of my terror. Every breath reminded me I was a prisoner here, intangible chains tied around my ankles. No one heard me cry later, when I snuck out the side door during a short lull. The street was quiet, a single flickering lamp overhead. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle sobs because tears were dangerous. Mustafa might come looking, and I suspected no neighbor would step in if they saw a trembling girl in the shadows. They would just assume it was more of Laleli's nighttime drama, business as usual. Sure enough, news of my refusal reached the man at home. I came back to find him pacing the living room, rage in his eyes. My mother shrank against the wall, arms wrapped around her middle. As soon as I stepped inside, he slapped me with the back of his hand, sending a jolt of pain through my jaw. "You humiliated them," he growled, seizing my shirt. "This city is built on respect and connections. I had to beg them not to punish us." I tasted blood. My vision swam. I could not form words. He slammed me against the wall, cursing in Turkish. I heard my mother whimper, "Stop, please," but she dared not pull him off me. Finally, he let me drop to the floor. My cheek throbbed, my ears rang. "Next time," he spat, "you obey." Then he stormed out, presumably to drink away his frustration. My mother rushed to me, tears streaming. She tried to cradle my face, but I pushed her away, a raw sob escaping my chest. "Why won't you leave him?" I choked, voice cracking. She shook her head, guilt etched in every feature. "Where would we go, Inna? He will track us down, we have no money." And there it was, the same old trap. Our silence and complicity had a price. I curled up on the floor, feeling tears soak my hair, hating everything. Hating him, hating the city, hating my own powerlessness. Leather, fear, and now blood. The trifecta of my existence. I tried to picture calling the police or running to a neighbor. The memory of that alley flashed in my mind. No one cared. People averted their eyes, protected themselves. My accent, my foreign ID, none of it would earn me sympathy from authorities. The city would not save me. The city devoured girls like me daily. Some nights, I wondered if my soul was already half gone, because I had grown numb. The first time he slapped me, I cried for hours. Now, I swallowed tears quickly, knowing tears only fueled his anger. I would cradle my bruises in silence, drifting in and out of fitful sleep. My mother curled in her bed, weeping in quiet gasps. We never had real conversations anymore, just apologies and pleas. I also learned how quickly friends could vanish when silence was the cost of survival. Zara did what she could, but she had her own fights to wage. She rarely visited now that I was stuck in the leather store. Bakir did not welcome her quickly visiting. I felt her pulling away, either by her choice or by force, leaving me more isolated. More heartbreakingly, I realized my mother was clinging to him so fiercely because she believed he was our only shield from total ruin. Betraying him, trying to escape, risked unleashing his vengeance or that of his associates. So we stayed, locked in this twisted arrangement where we kept quiet, endured bruises, and parted with our dignity inch by inch. Sometimes, in the store's quiet hours, I would slump on a stool and stare at the racks of leather. Each jacket looked so polished, so perfect. Wealthy tourists or shady businessmen would buy them for show, oblivious to the girl selling them, or perhaps delighting in her captivity. In a way, those jackets symbolized me, a commodity. If something is for sale, who cares about its feelings? And that was the hush of complicity. We were all playing roles in a brutal marketplace. Mustafa pretended to be a legitimate shop manager. Bakir pretended to be a businessman. The man at home pretended to be a caring husband. I pretended to be just a reluctant salesgirl, too timid to speak. None of us told the full truth, because the second we did, everything would implode, and we would all pay the price. Amid this despair, a faint rumor trickled into my ears. Some NGO or local charity occasionally patrolled the district, looking for trafficked girls to help. But I never saw them. Maybe they existed in another part of the city. Maybe they were just an urban legend. Once, I overheard a passing conversation in Russian, a pair of women discussing a safe house for abused migrant women. My heart pounded. Could it be real? Could I bring my mother there? But then they laughed bitterly, calling it a rumor that turned out to be a front for more exploitation. My sliver of hope shriveled. Another false dawn. I began to smell my own fear, even under the constant reek of leather. It clung to my clothes, my hair, like a sour sweat that would not wash away. I showered daily, scrubbing until my skin turned raw, yet the dread remained, seeping from my pores. I would catch a whiff of it when I was alone. That intangible stench of hopelessness. The city offered small reprieves. Sometimes the sky would be a brilliant pink at sunset, and I would pause, transfixed by the beauty. But then I would remember I was late for my shift at the leather box, and the glow in the sky would fade into that sickening sensation in my gut. One night, I found myself at closing time, counting the till while Mustafa smoked by the door. The street outside was mostly quiet, save for an occasional motorbike revving past. My mother's husband had demanded I bring home extra cash. He said he would find a buyer for me if I failed. I tried not to let that ring in my head as I balanced receipts. Suddenly, the door crashed open. A man stumbled in, clearly drunk, slurring in Turkish. He reeked of alcohol and cologne. Mustafa jumped up, trying to wave him out. "We're closed!" But the man fixated on me, mumbling about how he needed a place to relax. My throat constricted. Mustafa hissed that I should handle it since I spoke a bit of Turkish. I approached, heart pounding. The drunk man reached for my face, his breath hot with Raki. "Gel Buraya. Come here," he muttered. My reflex was to recoil, but he grabbed my wrist, twisting painfully. My eyes watered. Mustafa tried to intervene half-heartedly, but the man swung a punch at him. Fear spiked in my chest. This was turning into a brawl. I wrenched my wrist free, ignoring the sting of skin. Then, in a surge of desperation, I grabbed a heavy leather jacket from the rack and flung it at the man's face. The weight of it caught him off guard, tangling over his head. Mustafa leapt in, shoving him out the door. The man staggered, cursing, then stumbled away into the night. The door slammed. Mustafa glared at me, chest heaving. "You are trouble, girl. Always trouble," he spat. Then he locked the door, leaving me trembling. My wrist throbbed, my mind reeling with close call images. In the aftermath, I realized how precarious my situation was. At any moment, a random drunk, a powerful client, or a ring of criminals could upend my world. I had no recourse. Because who would listen if I spoke? No one hears you here. So I kept quiet, tears burning down my cheeks once Mustafa turned his back. By the time I got home, the man was there, arms folded, demanding to see how much I had earned in commissions. He clenched his jaw at the paltry sum, no doubt planning some retribution soon. I braced myself for the next wave of violence. That night, as my mother and I lay in the dark, she reached over, brushing her fingertips across the bruise on my jaw. It had faded to a greenish yellow. She whispered, "I remember when I used to kiss your bruises better, back when you were little." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I am sorry, Inna. I never wanted this for you." I had no words left. We were locked in a silent heartbreak, mother and daughter, each paying the price of silence to keep afloat in a city that thrived on our fear. The smell of leather, the taste of tears, the weight of bruises. This was our reality now. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the night's hush, thinking about how no one hears you here, even if you scream. I wondered if we were worth saving at all. Because in a city like Istanbul, if you do not speak, you vanish quietly, and if you do speak, you might vanish loudly. Either way, you pay.